Hello, I'm Scott Wheeler, the host of the Northeast Kingdom Voice. In recent days, the Northeast Kingdom was rocked by the murder of Melissa Jenkins of St. Johnsbury. Since then, many people in the kingdom have wondered just how safe they are. Today's guest is Keith Flynn, the Commissioner of the Vermont Department of Public Safety. Thank you for coming on, Keith.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
So, you've been in law for many years. You were once a trooper, and then
Yes.
you were a prosecutor.
That's right.
Have you seen any murders such as this that really rocked the kingdom?
Well, there have been a number of incidents throughout the state that have had, profound effects on, how we perceive, Vermont,
Right.
and how we perceive the safety of Vermont within the state. However, it's important to remember that these incidents, they're extremely tragic. They have a toll on the community. They certainly have a way of causing us to pause and take a look at, how is Vermont in regard to its safety preparation? How is the way of life threatened? And it's important to remember that Vermont is still one of the safest places in the country to live.
You know what I have a hard time understanding, because I feel this way, is when two drunks kill each other, it's horrible, but I don't get the same feeling. And you've probably dealt with many domestic murders over the years, and those are even more horrible. But on the other hand, is there something about this one, the killing of a young teacher by nobody closely related, nobody related to her, and it was kind of random.
Well, certainly whenever there's a murder, there are a number of different dynamics that can exist. And we still need to wait and see what some of the dynamics were of the particular case that you're talking about. And it's important that we let the justice system work this through, that we let the police investigation proceed, and that we come to the answers that are necessary so that we can follow through on justice. Because at the end of the day, that's what separates our system of justice from anywhere else, is that we tend to, and we are dedicated to making sure that we get the answers, that we do a real investigation, that we are mindful of procedural rights and protections, and that we follow those procedural rights and protection in getting to a just resolution. And that's where we are.
Right, and because you see a lot on the internet, you see it on the news blogs, is we ought to just take them out and lynch them. But you know what, on a gut level, that sounds like a good idea, but in reality is, if we were to do that, where would we go as a society?
Well, and the important thing to remember is, like what I just said, we are a country of laws, and as administrators of the law in Vermont, such as in my position as Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety, it's important that we adhere to those laws, that we provide those procedural protections, that we look at some of the basis of those constitutional protections which trace way back to our founding fathers and some of the values that they brought to the Constitution, to our Bill of Rights, where we protect those. And that's what separates us from other countries, is we have a mentality where we truly respect those rights, even in the worst of circumstances. But even in the worst of circumstances, we need to make sure that we adhere to those rights and justice is done.
Right. Now, you are considered the state's top cop. Is that correct?
That's what some have said. Yeah.
Right.
As the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety, one of the things that one of the divisions that I supervise and administer is the Vermont State Police.
Right. So when arrests were made quickly, how did you feel as the top cop in the state? Were you pretty proud of your men and women?
Absolutely. One of the things that's important to remember is this was a team effort by not only the state police but other agencies being involved, and certainly the effort put in by the state police was just exemplary. Important as far as the investigation goes is, and this is not only to this case but to any case, it's important to follow the evidence, see where it leads you, and to get the resources that are needed to be able to go out and be able to allow those leads and that evidence to be followed. And in this case, certainly the command staff to the state police did an exemplary job of from the report of the crime to the discovery of the body. But it's important to remember that this is not the end.
Right.
An investigation can be long. There are a number of things that need to be developed. There's certainly a time for physical evidence to be developed and analyzed, and plus for it to be put into a cohesive report so that it gives an overview as to what happened, and then it has the details to support it. And that's not particular to this case. Mm-hmm. That is particular to any case. But you're right, I'm particularly proud of the effort that the men and women of the Vermont State Police put into this case. Mm-hmm. And plus, an added part to that is not only the benefit to the justice system that that also allows, but also it allows the community some closure, at least some level of understanding as to why this happened in St. Johnsbury. It's unclear, certainly, as to all the reasons why it happened, but the ability to provide a community and a family closure is an important part of any investigation, and certainly it was part of this one.
Right. Yeah, as we were saying, it just seems to have gripped the entire region, and you're a Northeast Kingdom boy, born and bred, so you must have felt that yourself. Take off your hat in your position, but just as a human being, you must have really felt this death as well.
Well, sure. I mean, I certainly, this was close to the area where I was born and raised, but I certainly feel that same concern for any crime like that occurs anywhere in the state, because it's my obligation, especially as commissioner, to make sure that we provide not just an adequate response, but a response that's a total response, whether it's making sure that we have the resources there, making sure that we're bringing in other agencies to aid in the investigation. My obligation now as the commissioner is to make sure that we use the same type of approach and the same comprehensive approach to an investigation, whether it's in St. Johnsbury or Brattleboro or Shaftesbury or Essex.
The one thing when you were appointed to the position by Governor Shumlin is that was a great victory for the Shumlin administration. And I know I've told you this before, but it was a great loss for Orleans County, because for anybody to follow in your footsteps, because you got to admit, is I think when you left Orleans County, is even people who you prosecuted, most of them were able to look you in the face and say, well, I don't agree with it, but I was treated well. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's true?
I hope that's true, because I always tried to treat people as I would want to be treated. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's one thing that a message that I also bring to the law enforcement officers too, is that we have a job to do, and it's important that we do that job, mm-hmm. and that we treat people the way that we would want to be treated. In that, in some instances, people make mistakes, but those mistakes are criminal. And when that happens, it doesn't necessarily always mean that they're a bad person. It means they made a very bad decision. And so to that extent, we want to make sure that we treat people with respect, but we also want to make sure that at the end of the day, our obligation to this state is to make sure Vermont is the safest place in the country to live. And there are some people that deserve a very straight, quick response, and sometimes the response as far as the end result of the criminal justice system is harsh, and maybe it means that they're going to be in jail for a great deal of time. But that's how the justice system works, and when our justice system is working the best, it recognizes both of those extremes.
I've lived a pretty deprived life in the sense of run-ins with the law. I haven't even had a speeding ticket. And but I have been pulled over a couple times for minor things like a headlight out or something. By the time I get done, I think I have a customer for my Northland Journal, because I'm usually get chatting with them, and the next thing I know, I think they're too busy listening to me and forget why they pulled me over. Now tell me, when a lot of times when we run into law enforcement, a lot of times it's because we're speeding, because we're doing something. So people have a habit of having a jaded outlook towards lawmen. And sometimes some of them earn that reputation because they're not community focused, in the sense of, sometimes I think they have a habit of treating everybody as a potential enemy, which might be, true in some cases, but we're also their allies. Is that image changing a bit?
Yeah, I believe it is. Because one of the things that's important that I talked to my command staff about, and one of the things that I want troopers to be, is I want troopers to be curious. I don't want people that are going to just walk up to a vehicle, for instance, on a car stop, and just give me your license, give me your registration, go back to the car. I want people to be curious. Our job sometimes is to look beyond what we see. Look beyond just the motor vehicle stop and see what else may be going on. We have many obligations in this state to certainly, we have to be aware as to instances of people transporting drugs. We have to be aware of people that may be involved in other illegal activity, whether it's involved in transporting stolen property. There just are a number of things that may be evident upon that motor vehicle stop. So I expect the troopers are going to be curious, they're going to be looking into these matters, but also that they're going to treat people with the respect that they deserve, because at the end of the day, we're all Vermonters, and the important thing is to treat people the way that you would like to be treated, but to be thorough and do your job.
And we started off by talking about the murder of Melissa Jenkins, and how we still are relatively safe in Vermont, but there is a different side of life, I understand, where we do have more serious drug-related crimes.
Absolutely. One of the biggest problems that we have in Vermont right now, and there's certainly been a lot of attention to this in the legislature, is the opiate drug epidemic. And we are looking at, together with the legislature, looking at various ways to combat that. One of the ways that we're looking at is, for instance, enhancing law enforcement access to the prescription drug monitoring system. We're looking at ways to combat the influence that organized crime may have in Vermont in making Vermont accessible for these pills and other type of opiates to come in. But at the end of the day, it's important to remember that for Vermont to be successful in dealing with the opiate drug problem, three things need to happen. First of all, we need to have a serious commitment to the educational component. We need to make sure that we are educating our young people, that we have the education within the schools, and that we have the public education to identify issues, to help people identify the issues and make a response to those. Coupled with that education component, we need to have an enforcement piece. It's important that law enforcement have access to the prescription drug monitoring system, that we are proactive in dealing with a number of things such as drug diversion within the state, the prevalence of organized crime and what effect they may be having either directly or indirectly. And then thirdly, the last thing that we need to do as part of a comprehensive approach to the opiate epidemic is we need to look seriously at how we're addressing this with a rehabilitation program. And that rehabilitation needs to be far-reaching. It needs to be within the correctional facilities. We need to have meaningful rehabilitation outside of correctional facilities for both people that have been convicted of crimes and those that have not. But we need to have all three of those pieces together in order to have a comprehensive approach to how we are going to deal with this opiate epidemic.
Now, one thing you didn't speak about, because I don't know if it's a real issue or not, but I've spoken to a couple people who are recovering opiate addicts, and neither one of them got onto them because they wanted to.
That's right.
They needed medical attention. One of them broke his ankle, and next thing he knew is he was addicted to it. And by the time then the doctor ended up shutting him off, And then he goes into great detail about how he went from this law-abiding, upstanding citizen to this person who he was still functioning. But on the other hand, he was buying his drugs off the street. And I asked him all about it, and he said one way they do it is they find out which doctors will prescribe what. Do you think the doctors and other medical folks, do you think they're trained well enough in understanding?
I certainly think there's a training component of it there. That's one of the things that we've been talking about in the legislature. When I referred back to the education piece, that's part of the education piece that we need to have. The education piece not only needs to reach out to our young people, but it also needs to reach out to our physicians, our providers. It needs to reach out to that entire realm so that we can have a complete system that has a strong base and that we move forward from there. The instance that you just talked about, that's not unusual. That happens. And that stresses, when you look at these three areas that I spoke of, that stresses the importance of having a rehabilitation piece in there. We need to have rehabilitation that is accessible both to people that are incarcerated because of crimes or have been placed under some type of supervision, or we need to have the rehabilitation piece that is available to people who have not had involvement with the criminal justice system, because it is an addiction and we need to address it.
Now, we both grew up in the Derby, Newport area, a few years apart, but we're in the 50-something year category. People like us might say, well, we grew up here and there wasn't any real problems. You had alcohol and you had some pot and a few other things. Has life here in Orleans County changed that much since we were teenagers?
I think it's changed throughout the state. And there are a number of factors that have affected that. We're a much more mobile community than we used to be. Certainly the border is not the same border that you and I grew up on. Certainly some of the type of crimes that are being committed now, some of the public safety concerns may not necessarily be the same type of concerns that were prevalent when you and I were growing up. But one of the things that is important for law enforcement as far as addressing these concerns, and it's something that I've been speaking about a great deal in regard to the state police, is it's important for police to evolve, and it's important, and I've placed this as one of my priorities as Commissioner of Public Safety, is to move the Vermont State Police to the next generation of law enforcement. That means having a technical awareness of certainly some of the instruments of crime now, which are much different than they used to be. For instance, the prevalence of child pornography and the effect that that has is certainly something that we need to be aware of. And as investigators, we need to be looking at those areas and finding ways to keep ahead of the technology. One of the things that we were actually talking about today in the State House was how are we going to address some of the laboratory needs in the Vermont Forensic Lab, which is within one of my divisions, to address the analysis of digital equipment or electronic equipment. One of the proposals that's now before the legislature is to add positions within the department which would create civilian forensic examiners to allow my department to be able to put more sworn officers out doing the investigations. As has been talked about over the last few weeks in the legislature, we have a real need to investigate those type of crimes.
Right.
And those types of crimes are technology driven, both in the way that that information is disseminated and in the way that police officers respond to it. We certainly have different types of frauds that occur now, which are technology driven, and we need to be mindful of those. We need to make sure that as police agencies and as a police community in Vermont, that we're staying with that task of making sure that we have the technical expertise to be able to investigate that and to even get out in front of it so that we are able to give the type of response to those type of crimes that Vermonters expect and deserve.
I suspect that you in your multiple capacities throughout the years have seen just about it all, because back when I worked for the Chronicle, I used to occasionally do the court cases, and every once in a while it would bring me out of my rose-colored world, because I would see things in those police reports. It was like they would leave you speechless, because most of us who've led good law-abiding lives cannot even comprehend what people can do to each other, especially to their own kids. And so every once in a while, it was like, wow. Do you think people would be surprised on really some of the things that do go on that your officers have to deal with?
Yes, I think they would. But one of the things that I've been very mindful of over the years, and this has not changed throughout my career, is the commitment that we need to make as a state to the victims of crime. We have an obligation to victims of crime to give them the support that they need after the crime, to make sure that there are appropriate services provided to them, and to make sure that they receive the appropriate amount of respect and compassion from the legal system that they deserve. No one asked to be a victim of crime.
Right.
And as a community, certainly one of the things that we need to do is be mindful of that, whether it's in the domestic violence area, whether it's in the sexual assault area, whether it's children of crime. We need to get better as a system in how we deal with the victims of crimes and how we approach the healing process. And that's something that I've been committed to since my tenure with the Vermont State Police and Department of Public Safety, and which will continue until that ends.
So we only have a couple more minutes left, but on that note, when you talk about victims of crime, I assume that Melissa's son, who witnessed the crime, is being well cared for, and when you question a child, that must be a delicate thing in its own.
Oh, absolutely. Over the years, in my past capacity as the state's attorney here in Orleans County, I had an opportunity to deal with many children that were victims of crime. And it's important to remember that children that are victims of crime or that witness crime, they may not process it the same way that we would as adults.
Right.
They don't come from the same point of reference that we do. They don't have the same experience bank to draw upon. And many times it'll be their perception of what they saw that needs to be looked at. Their innocence sometimes provides the root to their credibility, because they don't have an opportunity to rationalize or to come up with alternative responses. It's their innocence that many times leads to the credibility.
So have we changed now? Because as I started off by saying, I've never seen a murder so rock the region. Do you think we've changed? Do you think our innocence has been lost, at least to a degree, maybe whether it's an unhealthy degree or a healthy degree?
I think that what happens as with any violent crime, and certainly the state of Vermont has seen some violent crimes over the last few years, is it causes us pause to stop and reflect and to really examine how we approach our own safety, how we approach the safety of our community, and what steps we make in doing that. And I really do believe, though, that as a community, we are strong. And when I talk about community being strong, I'm talking about not only particular areas of the state, but the state in general. We have a resiliency in this state that is, I think, second to none. We certainly witnessed that during our response to Hurricane Irene, both the initial response and the response that we're going through now as far as restoring Vermont. And that resiliency, I think, to a great deal, relates back to our heritage in Vermont. We are essentially a hardworking group of people here in Vermont, and I think we call upon that strength. It provides us the resiliency we're looking for, and we will learn from tragedies. We will place those tragedies in an area of respect where they need to be, and that we'll move forward from here with lessons learned and reflections back on people that we lose in the circumstances.
Well, Keith, I would like to thank you for coming on the show. And again, I think you are doing a great job.
Thank you.
I've known you in several capacities. I have even sat in your courtroom, and you've grilled me as when I was a character witness. and you have been nothing less than a gentleman, and I think the Shumlin administration should be proud to have you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in today.